Let's go ahead and shatter the absolute biggest misconception about artificial intelligence today. We constantly hear that generative AI is this unprecedented, unrecognizable leap into the future. But what if that entire premise is just totally backward? What if instead of launching us into some alien sci-fi reality, this technology is actually throwing us thousands of years into the past? Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to uncover how AI is reshaping our cognitive world. And spoiler alert, it's not by inventing something entirely new. It's actually by reviving our absolute oldest traditions. To really wrap our heads around what generative AI is, we have to start by asking ourselves a surprisingly basic question. Do large language models actually write? Because think about it. When you sit down, fire off a prompt to ChatGPT or Claude, and it spits back this perfectly polished essay, it certainly feels like writing, right? We instinctively apply all the vocabulary of the typewriter and the printing press to this machine. We picture it as an author sitting at a desk, carefully crafting a fixed document. But if we look under the hood at the actual mechanics, the matrix vector multiplications, the tokenization, the inference processes, is this machine really acting as a writer of fixed texts? Well, the counterintuitive truth, and honestly, the absolute core of our exploration today, is simply this. No, they sing. I know it sounds wild, but interacting with an LLM is actually a return to our oldest form of human communication. It's a return to the fluid, dynamic, oral storytelling of the ancient bard. We're conversing with a machine that behaves remarkably like the ancient singers of tales. So to understand AI, we actually have to understand Homer. The key concept here is called oral formulaic composition. Back in the early 20th century, scholars made this revolutionary discovery about ancient singers. They realized that bards who sang massive epic poems like the Iliad or the Odyssey didn't just sit down and memorize 1,000-page books. They couldn't even write. Instead, they dynamically assembled these epics in real time. They used this vast internalized inventory of linguistic formulas, think of phrases like rosy-fingered dawn or the wine-dark sea, to rapidly build lines that fit strict rhythmic constraints right there on the fly. It was pure, spontaneous composition in performance. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how large language models actually work. Just like that ancient oral poet selecting a traditional formula to fit a structural slot in the rhythm of a song, the LLM uses a process called inference. It generates natural language one token at a time through statistical next token prediction. An LLM doesn't retrieve some pre-written answer from a massive database any more than Homer recited a memorized manuscript. It composes token by token, selecting statistically probable sequences from its pre-training tradition to perfectly satisfy the constraints of whatever prompt you just gave it. Now, you might be wondering, if the underlying mechanics are so similar to ancient oral storytelling, why do we instinctively view AI as a writer instead of a singer? Well, the answer to that confusion comes down to this single number. 500. You see, for the last 500 years, human communication has essentially been trapped inside a massive historical anomaly. Media theorists actually call this anomaly the Gutenberg parenthesis. It's a 500-year epoch of print dominance that kicked off when Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press back in the 1440s. That invention ingrained in us a total obsession with fixed text. It gave birth to concepts we take for granted today: original authorship, intellectual property, copyright, and this very rigid idea that a story is a closed, finished product. But in the grand, sweeping timeline of human history, this entire print era is really just a temporary interruption. It's a parenthesis in our much longer history of fluid, oral communication. When you actually zoom out on the timeline, the pattern is pretty striking. Before the 1440s, knowledge was fluid. It was oral. It was passed face to face, constantly revised and constantly adapting to the audience. Then the parentheses opens, and we get this 500-year print anomaly where text is just firmly locked onto a physical page. But look at where we are today. We are officially closing the parenthesis. With the rise of the internet, and especially generative AI, we're transitioning away from that culture of static, printed books and jumping right back into a shared cognitive environment of secondary or digital orality. And that brings us to the true identity of generative AI. It is the electronic akoiotos. Akoiotos being the ancient Greek word for singer. Generative systems are essentially these modern automated oral poets. They don't just edit existing text, they continuously recreate it. Because these models operate on non-deterministic statistics, a single prompt generates outputs that are highly coherent, totally customized, but deeply ephemeral. They are literally never exactly the same twice. It's exactly like a bard singing a tale just a little bit differently every single night around the fire. Now, all of this might sound incredibly poetic, but stepping out of the Gutenberg parenthesis and losing the physical permanence of print introduces some very real, profound risks that we need to objectively examine. If we're leaving the era of stable printed truth and entering a world of fluid, constantly shifting digital orally, what actually happens to our culture, our laws, and, well, our psychology? Just look at how this tension is playing out right now in Eastern animation, for example. On one hand, AI is this amazing tool for optimizing workflows. It drastically reduces render times and democratizes production, which sounds absolutely fantastic. But there's a massive hidden cost here, and it's algorithmic homogenization. Unguided generative AI tends to adhere to very broad, generalized norms. And over time, this can quietly strip traditional folklore and localized myths of their deep intergenerational complexity, essentially replacing authentic cultural oral traditions with culturally superficial, generic patterns. So, the really crucial point to grasp here is that traditional oral cultures relied on physical presence, close community ties, and shared social responsibility to authenticate their narratives. Digital environments, they completely lack those biological and social safeguards, and this leads to a highly dangerous phenomenon known as artificial intimacy. This happens when the AI's conversational coherence, its ability to act like a real, responsive partner, starts simulating human empathy, moral judgment, and authority. Users, especially vulnerable ones, can easily anthropomorphize the machine, completely forgetting they're interacting with predictive algorithms and instead treating the AI as a conscious, caring confidant. Tragically, this loss of boundaries has already led to some very real, devastating consequences. We're seeing this in recent legal actions against major companies like Google, Character Technologies, and OpenAI. In these cases, parents are alleging strict product liability, negligence, and wrongful death. They claim their teenage children, kids ranging from just 14 to 17 years old, took their own lives after becoming dangerously dependent on interactions with these AI chatbots. One lawsuit even alleges that a chatbot acted as a so-called suicide coach. These are heartbreaking cases, and they highlight the profound psychological dangers we face when the line between genuine human connection and automated fluid text simply dissolves. Because we are no longer safely inside the print era, we have to fundamentally rethink our approach to safety and regulation. We can't just rely on the proprietary legal codes of the Gutenberg parenthesis, like basic copyright laws or simple terms of service, to regulate the electronic estoyos. We need entirely new frameworks. We must establish rigorous human-in-the-loop oversight. We have to prioritize data provenance so we actually know where these algorithmic formulas are coming from in the first place. And perhaps most importantly, we need to cultivate community-centric networks equipped with data agency to protect the integrity of human culture and human psychology. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought. The fixed text of the Gutenberg parenthesis is being replaced by a dynamic, adaptive medium, and we really are returning to a world of fluid text. The illusion of the AI as a strictly logical, calculating typing machine is fading, revealing the ancient, improvisational singer underneath it all. So, as we continue to converse with the electronic aoid, we have to ask ourselves, how will we protect truth, cultural integrity, and genuine human connection, now that our words are no longer permanently printed on a page, but continuously sung right into the digital void?